So what is it that Mozilla is doing wrong? I asked and you answered. I meticulously combed through the data and I sussed out patterns. And now it's just a matter of sharing that data with you in this video. But before we get to those numbers, let's talk about why I actually made this survey. And there will be chapters for those of you who just want to get to the results of the survey. Now, it all started a little while ago when Thunderbird announced that they're working together with K9 Mail, a free and open source Android email client, with the goal of eventually transforming it into Thunderbird for Android. Pretty awesome news if you ask me. And the fact is, many of my friends and colleagues actually work for Thunderbird, and I don't think it would be controversial to say that Thunderbird's marketing is some of the best in the open source world. The day they announced their partnership with K9 Mail, I rather flippantly tweeted, "How is it that Thunderbird has a better marketing team than Firefox does?" And that got me thinking, like, no, really, how is it that Thunderbird, the scrappy little free and open source Mozilla offshoot project that made less than $5 million last year, has a better marketing team than Firefox, where Mozilla made some $500 million in that same time? And that's the legitimate question that I've been mulling over in my head for the past few months. And I think that I finally have an answer. On my 27th birthday, Mozilla CEO Mitchell Baker published a company-wide memo stating that Thunderbird would be spun off into its own company and would no longer rely on Mozilla technology. Since that announcement, there was a lot of uncertainty about the project going forward, and Thunderbird went through some growing pains. Yet today, it's a self-sustained project that employs developers and a world-class marketing team. They have a well-defined roadmap, they communicate clearly with the community, and Thunderbird is well-respected in the wider FOSS community. On the flip side though, there's a very loud portion of the free and open source world that is skeptical of Mozilla at best and actively distrusts them at worst. Even when they make major technological advancements and push the industry forward with technologies like Rust, Mozilla seemingly undercuts those achievements with misstep after misstep, which only serves to add fuel to the paranoia. Not to mention, their marketing is at once baffling, overly corporate, and banal, taking weird and sometimes hypocritical stances, saying, for example, they stand for online privacy, and then making deals to install browser extensions without user consent in order to get some cashola. Furthermore, Mozilla has been accused of having gone woke and caring more about woke causes than the technology they produce, or so the critics proclaim. And sure, if one filters their entire socio-political ideology through 4chan memes like get woke and go broke, then I can see how one might draw similar conclusions. But what I find so curious is that when you really look at Mozilla, what it is they produce, the technology, the innovation, and the documentation they contribute to the world, and compare it to their corporate messaging, an exceptionally confusing picture emerges. They do a lot of great work, and yet so many people absolutely mistrust them. So that's led me to the conclusion that Mozilla is obviously doing something wrong, and I'm honestly, seriously curious about what it is. And that's not to say that Mozilla shoulders all of the blame here, but that is what this video is for. How can Mozilla regain the respect they once had, make Firefox a competitive browser again, and build a sustainable business that doesn't rely on their chief opposition? That's why I put a call on Twitter for current and former Mozilla employees, and I wanted to interview them and ask questions about the company, its structure, and its leadership. And I had a few interesting perspectives from a couple anonymous individuals. One Mozilla employee told me, quote, "The only problem with Mozilla Corporation is that they are big and not great about talking about the cool stuff that they're doing, at least within our community. The leadership in Mozilla Corporation is very good. They make hard decisions and have made some that might actually hurt their bottom line, but are the right things to do. They're trying to compete in a world of tech monopolies where Google makes their websites run worse on Firefox, not for any technical reason, but just because it's not Chrome. In a world where Microsoft just changes the default browser to Edge, even if that's not what the user wants. It's a hard environment to run a browser in." And that's the kind of thing that I heard from both current and former Mozilla employees. Have these folks just drunk the Mozilla Kool-Aid? Or is it that Mozilla is just bad at engaging in the free and open source world? That's when I decided to make a questionnaire to see what the general public thinks about Mozilla. Responses were strong, but not anything especially scientific, so take these results with a grain of salt. The first thing I asked is actually, which desktop browser do you use? Nearly 70% of people said Firefox or a derivative, with about 20% using Chrome or a derivative, and the rest using Safari. Needless to say, that is a comfortable majority of people answering this survey who are using Firefox. Like I said, nearly 75% of people are using Firefox or their technology. That's impressive, but it also might taint some of the answers to this survey, so keep that in mind. But I'm interested in getting more data on this, and I'm going to have a link to another survey down below with the same questions. Hopefully we can get a more inclusive and representative survey out of this, because I'd really like to know what Chrome users think about Mozilla. I then asked about Mozilla's social causes, something I hear a lot of people complain about with the company. Quote, do you believe Mozilla prioritizes social causes above their technology? With 54.3% saying no and about 46% saying yes. The majority said no, but for a questionnaire filled out by mostly Firefox users, a shocking number said yes. Do you trust Mozilla to make decisions that benefit the internet as a whole? Nearly 2/3 of respondents said yes, that they do trust Mozilla to make decisions that will benefit the internet. But when we break the answers to this question down by which browser respondents use, the numbers get interesting. Just about 75% of Firefox users and 25% of other browser users say they trust Mozilla to make good decisions for the internet. However, more than half of the folks who answered no self-reported using Firefox or a derivative, and about 41% of other browsers don't trust Mozilla either. I find that to be a fascinating result, and I wonder if the total respondents had looked more like actual web browser market share, if those numbers would hold, or if they would be different. If you use Chrome, use the link below and answer the questionnaire. I'd love to hear from you guys. So then I asked people about Mozilla's manifesto, the documentation that lays out Mozilla's 10 guiding principles. What, you didn't know Mozilla had such a document? Well, you're not alone. Some 66% of respondents were unaware of Mozilla's social contract. And that's honestly the first thing that I think Mozilla needs to do to regain credibility in the eyes of the FOSS community. Mozilla needs to make their intentions and their motivations clear. They should be talking about the Mozilla manifesto and ensure it's rigorously adhered to and that it guides decision-making at every level of the organization. Debian has such a document, and so do other Linux distributions and FOSS projects. And what's more, the majority of respondents agreed with the principles of the Mozilla manifesto. Some 82% of respondents either agreed or strongly agreed with them. And when you look at the numbers, most folks actually felt that they were doing a good job upholding each principle. However, in many key areas, the data shows that they could be doing better. In some instances, a lot better. Now, I asked respondents if they felt Mozilla's actions demonstrate their commitment to following the principles in their manifesto. And I asked them to rank Mozilla's commitment to each principle on a scale from 1 to 5, with 1 being no commitment and 5 being a strong commitment. Now, this section of the questionnaire gives us a glimpse into the community's perception of Mozilla's motivations. Of the 10 principles, all of them had over 50% ranked at a 4 or a 5. Meaning that the majority of respondents thought Mozilla was either committed or strongly committed to said principle. But there were only 2 principles over 50% of respondents answered strong commitment to. Number 1 was the internet is a global public resource that must remain open and accessible. And number 2, free and open source software promotes the development of the internet as a public resource. The rest of the principles, though, were not so rosy. If we combined 1, 2, and 3 ranks, then there were 5 principles that totaled 40% or more. The first was magnifying the public benefit aspects of the internet is an important goal worthy of time, attention, and commitment. The internet must enrich the lives of individual human beings at 42%. Transparent community-based processes promote participation, accountability, and trust, 42%. Individuals must have the ability to shape the internet and their own experiences on it, 44%. And commercial involvement in the development of the internet brings many benefits. A balance between commercial profit and public benefit is critical, 45%. Now, with disapproval ratings at 45% in some instances, that should be enough for Mozilla executives to pause and reflect, especially when respondents overwhelmingly approve of the principles in the manifesto. So I believe Mozilla needs to refocus their marketing strategy, raise awareness of their manifesto, and emphasize how actions they take as an organization align with their stated principles. They need to call out companies and organizations that are undermining the purpose of Mozilla. And finally, they need to be tenacious like they were when they were first formed. Next, they need to foster better relationships. See, currently Mozilla is an enormous organization that fundamentally does not communicate well with the public, and, at least to me, is too preoccupied with corporate appearance and posturing. Now, I think this is evident by their stiff, their uninteresting, and lifeless emails. Not to mention the fact that Firefox has rebranded twice since 2015, and services are started and discontinued at a rate that almost rivals Google. Firefox OS? How about Firefox Send? Lockwise? Servo? Anybody? That's just to name a few. And at a minimum, this leads to a distrust of the organization's decision-making, but also distracts from the powerful technology that Mozilla is building and its core mission. There's nothing wrong with creating new products. I mean, that's something that any business needs to do to survive. And even shuttering ones that aren't making money is a part of doing business, even for nonprofits. But when the majority of people either don't know, or worse, don't trust your organization, and you're in an industry that requires goodwill from the public, you'd better get your priorities straight. That's where marketing is so important. Again, go back to the basics. Start with your base and grow from there. Capitalize on the movement. Put yourself at the forefront of digital privacy and online freedom. And I'm not saying they don't contribute to the FOSS community. They contribute an enormous amount to free and open source software. But there's a lack of engagement with the community, and that's what I'm talking about. I've been to several conferences, Linux and otherwise, and guess who is conspicuously absent from all of these events? Mozilla. And you might be thinking, well, Gardiner, Mozilla is a nonprofit. They don't have the money to go to industry events like this. Well, GNOME was at scale, and so was KDE, and the Software Freedom Conservancy, the EFF, and the FSF were there too. There were many nonprofits at scale. Mozilla would have fit right in, but they didn't attend. And it's that kind of disconnect and the perceived lack of engagement with the wider FOSS community that they could easily remedy. Finally, the last thing I think they need to do is get off the enemy's payroll. Now, Google as an organization is antithetical to nearly every principle of Mozilla's manifesto. So for an ideologically driven nonprofit like Mozilla to be strange bedfellows with Google, it's pretty harmful to their image. The fable of the scorpion and the frog comes to mind, with Google being the scorpion. Now, Google is not only invading privacy and working day in and day out to harm the web, but they're also Firefox's chief competitor. And that's the deeper issue here. See, when Google and Mozilla started their search deal, Google was just a search engine. They had a few other products like Gmail and Maps and whatever, but that was it. They didn't have Chrome. They weren't monopolizing the web and extending W3C protocols. They were the don't be evil Google of yesteryear. And at the time, Mozilla was paid millions of dollars a year to have Google be the default search engine in Firefox. And Firefox happily took that money. Why wouldn't they? But when Google started to work on Chrome, Mozilla continued to take the scorpion's money because they had gotten used to the money. Flash forward to 2022. The scorpion has stung the frog so many times that it's nearly dead, but a dead frog still floats. See, Google is using Mozilla and Firefox as a shield against antitrust lawsuits when it comes to Google's near monopolization of the web. That's the biggest issue here. The history of Mozilla is firmly rooted in Netscape. When I talked to Mozilla employees, many of them said that it's hard to run a browser in an environment dominated by huge corporations. But Netscape was tenacious. It was the scrappy little browser that nearly destroyed Microsoft. They fought for the open web. They took Microsoft to court. They fought against a single company exerting crazy influence over a nascent internet. And they were successful. But today, Mozilla, the legacy of that unrelenting David versus Goliath, is being abused by Google in a most perverse manner to defend itself against the very thing Netscape almost destroyed Microsoft over in the 90s. I mean, it's ironic, isn't it? I just hope that Mozilla can wake up as an organization, purge itself of Google's influence, and find within the organization the legacy of their forebearer. They need to fight Google and Microsoft and Facebook and Amazon and every other untoward company to make the web a better place for everyone. That's their legacy. That's the mantle of Netscape. And I think it's one that we all, as internet denizens, deserve. But that's just my opinion. I'd love to know what you think. Leave me a comment and let me know. I'd love to hear from you. I want to give a special shout out to my supporters on Patreon and my YouTube members who make what I do here possible. I wouldn't have been able to build this show into what it is today without you guys, so thank you. If you believe in the work that I'm doing and you want to help this show grow, consider using the links below to become a Linux warrior, and thanks. That's going to do it for now though. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a blessed day, and I'll see you next time.